Can you hear me? Can you hear me in the back? And behind? Lezbynai. We squatted down in a parking lot between two red-colored cars. Just a moment ago, a guy from the second floor shouted at us from his kitchen window as we started doing inappropriate stuff while hanging on the metal globe. You grabbed me, wrapping your legs around my hips. I didn't even notice when you started rubbing against me. Can I immerse the fingers of both of my hands, all 10 of them, into your thick, slightly wavy, sun-kissed hair? Brownish, withered lilacs, dried out by the sun, fluffy bumblebee bellies sticking out through the widely spread blooms that haven't seen rain for ages, you emerging in the background of a giant field of blooming Veronicas and my favorite 9-story building. Some charming girls used to live there once. Girls who loved other girls and perhaps still do. How beautiful you look. The palms of my hands, my tense fingers, are running across your body, reading it all, creating memories. I keep stumbling on something, but it doesn't dispel my determination. I'm counting the decorative pebbles on the facade of the 5-story building with my knuckles, eager to grab you by the waist. We are a knot, tangled along the busy gateway. Your blood is heated by thrill and looks of strangers. I'm facing them with my back, only halfway of me visible this way. When I fantasize, I feel looked at, not like you, the observer, an active observer who always knows what she wants to see. Your denim shorts get blurred out in my peripheric view and become tones among tones. The metallic button reflects a little patch of sunlight on my t-shirt while I'm undoing it, and your hand, slipped under my t-shirt, whisks it away, traveling towards my nipples, impatiently waiting for your touch. The patch of light pierces through the ground floor kitchen window of the nearby building and disappears in a hole of a lacy curtain. It probably lands on the door of a kitchen cabinet, hiding cups and plates. From this side, Lazdynai isn't too mysterious of a neighborhood. When I look at the facades of multi-story blocks of flats, I look at them as if they were transparent. It's more or less clear where the kitchen, bedroom, or living room is. In a park, we encounter a woman, having gone for a walk. She's wearing a skirt and a flowery blouse, walking down the forest path as if we're some sort of a catwalk, in her graceful golden flip-flops that almost lift her above the ground. A beautiful leather backpack in her left hand and a plastic bag in the right. She could be my mother. A thought comes as I scan her from head to toe. She could be my mother, I say after she passes by. I could be her if I had a husband and children waiting for me at home, I would definitely go to a park in search of peace and adventures. You mumble. What do you mean? I ask. Nothing concealed. I'd go for walks looking for beautiful lesbians, wallowing on park benches. I imagine I would have to, if I were still hesitant about making love out of mutual desire. Form and not content becomes the starting point when it comes to couples with a significant age difference. Let it be form. But does form define content? We curl up in a 4 square meter space, the two of us, with some pillows and blankets. We're going to stargaze. Although really, we just want to feel the pleasant coolness of the chilly August night while cuddling in each other's arms. The high and low frequencies, their contrast sharpens our senses. Why not just in a balcony? Your hands, gripping both of my shoulders, tremble a little. I can feel their vibration in my collarbone. Count to 7 and exhale. All right. You are stroking my arms down the shoulders, up and down. I'm scanning the shivers traveling across my body, through the thighs, across the back. I get goosebumps. The trembling gets overshadowed by a pulsation residing under my skin, traveling from one body part to another. Is it your hands and thighs leaning against my body, or is it me? I suck up your lips, moistly. You drown my lips, both the bottom and the top one, in your saliva. From your mouth to mine, from mine to yours, flows the river Nereus. Cars passing by on Architectus Street at midnight remind me that we are not alone in this world. In the meantime, you moan deeply and loudly while kissing me. I listen to you and try to catch your breath. I explore your back with my fingertips, the nerve endings in your thighs with the nerve endings in my thighs. It feels like you're already so close. Hold me tighter. Yes, I'm holding you. I can hear my neighbor from the 4th floor opening her balcony door. She enters and opens the window. I freeze for a moment. You freeze too. We can hear everything clearly. She takes out a cigarette, lights it up. She lives alone above me. That's how I know she's a neighbor. She honestly thinks you're my aunt. I whisper quietly so only you can hear me. Your aunt? I snigger through a tightly clenched white smile. Did the neighbor freeze? I can't hear her anymore. I can't even hear her breath. Maybe she's realizes she's not alone. Maybe she's trying to understand where all these weird noises, untypical of a Wednesday night, are coming from. Do you think she can hear us? You ask me. Of course, I mumble, moistening my mouth with my tongue. I stick 2 of your right hand fingers deep into my throat, biting them gently, sending a signal for my saliva to excrete abundantly, more abundantly. Back and forth, your fingers tickled my palate. I slowly pull them out, making a sign with my eyes. I guide your hands under the blanket with the impulses of my hands. Quiet. Stick them under the blanket. I follow your hands, immersing with my arse. I feel them drawing me closer, drawing my body, unafraid of the neighboring intimacy. I can feel them. I can feel them slowly, slowly touching me, slowly pulling my panties down. The neighbor lights up another cigarette. Is she listening? Maybe she even likes it. If she's listening and can hear us, maybe it's okay. Or perhaps she can't hear us, only herself. You never know with those balconies, but maybe she can't hear us after all. I never hear what she's doing. I inhale, exhale, inhale. With the third sigh I can hear it in sync with the squeaking of a closing window, rhythmically. I feel good. I can see from your eyes you feel good too. I can feel the coolness of the summer night piercing through the pulsating blankets, passing across the curve of my back, my neck, my cheeks, bringing your smell. How lovely you smell, and how tasty you are. I'm smelling your whole body, loudly. You're inside me, and I want to be inside you. Someone from a distant balcony coughs. You can't tell from which one. Entertainment for the whole building. In front of our house, there is only a street. So we settle down low on the side of the balcony, hidden from the public eye. Only a sound escaping through the open window of the glass balcony can give us away. A sound abstracted in the noise of the night, as if someone was crying or making love. And that's not even some rare, extraordinary phenomenon, like for instance would be 2 women in love, holding hands, walking down the chestnut alley of Žaručio Street. Is it a flat in an apartment building, your own private space? Is a flat in an apartment building still your own private space to have sex? Is a flat in an apartment building still sufficiently your own private space to have queer sex? Would you like to go for a walk? I have many places I dream about. Like what? I have a few, too. Concrete is something that really turns me on, as weird as it sounds. Among blocks and concrete floors, I discovered a paradise in utopia. I've been dreaming for a while about getting to know the night watcher of the local kindergarten so I can privatize the L-shaped concrete gazebo for a night. The one with slate roof, open to the world only by 90 degrees, protecting from wind and rain. What would you like to do there? A long while ago, I dreamt of sweeping it neatly, maybe even mopping the floor, lighting some big candles, bringing a sort of inflatable sofa, sleeping bags, and making love at dawn with a view to a childlike adventure park. This is how I remember it. And what do you fantasize about? I'm walking down the cliff and trying to reach the little beaches of Neres. You know, the ones from which you can see the bigger beaches of Vinges. Someone was sailing a huge inflatable flamingo. At that moment, I had a thought that I'd like to sail a boat, inflatable flamingo, and dike out among the whole of Neres. Smooch, talk, make out, wave to the passers-by. Like some time ago, the Yoni boat sailed down. Remember? So something like that. Just a little bit more intimate, and maybe even a few of us could be in it. In a huge, inflatable flamingo. My tongue is diving through your ear canal. I mouth up your whole ear. I register the various flavors of the body traveling, penetrating through the tissues of my mouth, through and across my chest, arms, belly, right into my soaked, even dripping pussy, which you just checked. And after checking it, you smelled it. And after smelling it, you trembled and trembled and trembled out of excitement and impatience. I'm moored next to you as if a hook, entering you with 3. For a moment, the body loosened and then tensed up again, having felt the thickening cavity and its boundaries fading away with the sliding. Can you hug me?
Morgane? Hello, Morgane? Are you there?
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes. Where are you?
I'm in Tokyo, Japan, and it's almost 3 in the morning right now.
How do you feel?
I feel great. How do you feel?
I feel fine.
Are you ready? Do you have everything set up?
I think I'm ready, yes.
Okay. If we're recording, we can start.
From Capitalism. We are hosting this week. So welcome to Girl Employees, a podcast about visual culture and platform capitalism. We are hosting this podcast together, Carmen and I will start by introducing myself. I'm Morgane, a visual artist and a writer who's also an affiliated researcher at the Institute of Network Culture. And Carmen.
Yes, I'm Carmen Hines, and I am a curator and writer-researcher based at the Technical University of Vienna. I was sitting on a bus just a few weeks back, and I saw someone wearing a hat, and it said, "Not everyone needs a podcast." It was bright green, and it had a big black Helvetica writing. It was 37 degrees outside, and everyone was caressing their phones, myself included. The phrase was taken, it would seem, from a trending hashtag on TikTok. With over 38.1 million posts with the hashtag on TikTok alone, "Not everyone should have a podcast" has become a frequently discussed topic by many podcast presenters, shedding light on the political misinformation often circulated on personal podcast channels. Podcasts are a medium that exists on the hinge of amateurism and performative expertise. Analyzing the many clips on TikTok, sometimes "not everyone has a podcast" becomes a kind of self-referential form of critique, a protective form of self-deprecation, a gesture to the expectation of personal and collective awareness, at a minimum, in a culture framed by hypocrisy and an urgency to show an awareness of this hypocrisy. To return to the hat, there seemed to be much more than a warning against the rampant spread of misinformation online and its effect on democracy, etc. A hat with "not everyone has a podcast" indicates a kind of existential knot at the heart of contemporary media culture. That existential knot is a kind of embeddedness within the structures that we criticize, of critiquing podcasts on podcasts, of purchasing a hat, probably online, that was produced from a circulated hashtag in order to criticize the blasé circulation of possibly misinformed but loudly proclaimed generalizations on life, love, or politics. Podcasts are a media emblematic of the platformed world. By a platformed world, Morgane and I mean an economy predicated on the linkages between the digital and the physical and the embodied. As we live in the platform era, where are the politics of irony culture? Can things fall flat into apolitical apathy? The word podcast comes from a combination of iPod and broadcast. Though similar to radio programs in form, they exist as files, which can be listened and played at a listener's convenience, anytime, anywhere. This session, for instance, will be recorded as a file for redistribution and circulation after these 30 minutes are over. The earliest use of the word podcast was traced to the Guardian columnist and BBC journalist Ben Hammersley, who coined the term in February 2004 while writing an article, who described the new medium as something where anyone could become a broadcaster. The inventors of podcasts are more often credited to the MTV video jockey Adam Curry and the software developer Dave Weiner. Weiner helped Curry develop a technology that enabled listeners to download audio files automatically from the internet as they became available, essentially a way of subscribing to audio content, or audio blogging, as it was first called. In 2003, Weiner developed an audio RSS feed for former New York Times reporter and public radio host Christopher Lydon, who used this new RSS feed to offer audio content of notable interviews on his blog. This show, Radio Open Source, launched in 2003 and is sometimes accredited as the first ever podcast. Podcasts caught attention of Steve Jobs around this time, who described it publicly as the kind of TiVo of radio, a way to record or to capture audio content for distribution via devices and data storing technologies. It is of little or no surprise that by 2005, a mere 2 years after the launch of Radio Open Source, Apple was very quick to jump onto the bandwagon. In the same year, George W. Bush became the first president to deliver a weekly address as a podcast. In the immediate years afterwards, podcasts became more user-friendly as pre-recorded audio files switched to streaming technologies, enabling podcasts to broadcast to live audiences and then offer the episode for download later on, as we are doing now in this space. In 2014, Apple released iOS 8, which had its podcast app built in, which brought the medium to the forefront of public visibility. To paraphrase an investigation by the Pinkerton Institute, it was Serial, a podcast that followed the re-examination of a 1999 murder of a Maryland teenager and questioning the conviction of her former boyfriend, that really changed the game. Serial became the first podcast to reach 5 million downloads, and according to Edison Research, the number of monthly podcast listeners in the United States of America essentially doubled in the 5 years following its premiere, from approximately 39 million listeners to 90 million. Today, podcasting is a several billion-dollar industry. Part of its value comes in that it opened up a new avenue for advertising and public relations, since podcasts can often reach audiences that other media cannot. Podcasts are more personalized or selected by listeners, meaning they have more access to the niches in data profiling. A 2019 study by the Interactive Advertising Bureau found that the podcast industry was responsible for $479 million in revenue in 2018. The podcast market has captured the interests of big media corporations, such as Google, Pandora, and Spotify, who are competing for listeners with the original supporter of podcasts, Apple. In 2019, Spotify announced a planned expenditure of $500 million on podcast-related acquisitions, including content studios and a creation app, and the company has plans to build out its own podcasting ad business. On a material level, basically anybody who has a microphone, a recording software, podcast hosting service, and thumbnail graphic can make a podcast. It is an extremely accessible form of content creation, which also makes it very attractive to big business. Large companies buy up the most popular podcasts and beginning to implement advertising options across the network. Content creators do the work of creating a public through a media, which is then monetized for advertising purposes by companies who buy access to this public. Multiple economic analysis indicate that this is far more profitable for the company than the podcast creator. Podcasters can also garner support from listeners through crowdfunding websites like Patreon, which provide special extras and content to listeners for free. You can also support us on Patreon at Girl Employee. Most podcasts occur during commuting, moving from one place to another, home to work, places of production to reproduction, and the spatial networks of between. Podcasts are usually consumed through movement, taking trains, driving, picking someone up. You may listen to them through a device, your AirPods, a telephone, an iPod. During COVID-19, the quantity of podcast listeners skyrocketed by almost 18%. While podcasts saw an initial slump as commute stopped, it increased, as specifically in the United States, listeners turned to business, finance, and comedy podcasts amidst uncertainty. Spotify, for example, reported that in July, its podcast consumption had doubled. As of October 2020, there were more than 34 million total podcast episodes on all channels available for listeners. As of 2024, there are an estimated 332.2 million podcast listeners worldwide. Podcasts are a converged medium. If we think about them on a material level, they bring together the audio, the web, media players, listening devices, and the business models they benefit from this convergence. They are deemed a disruptive technology because they have almost completely outflanked live radio. Podcasts are media structures that find their footing when bodies move through physical space, moving from home to work, moving around the house. For lack of a better word, they are a media fit for an economy of multitasking, to entertain oneself, to educate oneself, while working with one's hands or one's body. When considering listening as a practice, the podcast as a media raises key questions on the kinds of listening they engender. Is listening about informing oneself, feeling less alone in space, feeling less anxious in crisis-driven times? Maybe listening becomes something productive. The ingesting of information is the most optimal format for engaging forms of labor simultaneously, such as cooking or cleaning or exercising. Learn about physics while trying out a new recipe for lasagna. Thinking of the quantity of listeners downloading and hearing through their devices, one can imagine a stack of information relayed by voices through these devices, many of which are nestled in our ears. These are files, softwares, profitable because they function as networks. They bring together sponsors, advertisers, platforms, listeners, and data storing technologies into an easy access aggregate. This network exists atop the urban network, where one may listen as they move from home to work to leisure, or all of these things above simultaneously. I listened to a podcast about the history of bird watching. Around the section engaging specifically with kestrels, there is an advertisement for a popular platform where you can create your own professional website via a produced template. €10 a month, more or less, to launch your own business. I hear this sitting on a bus and see a seagull eating what I believe to be a pigeon, but I am not sure. I wonder whether this is a manifestation of the fact that I'm listening to a podcast about bird watching. Not everyone should have a podcast. What a pressure point, I think. Is this the solution for detangling the mess of things? Where does the responsibility lie? In the urge for content creation and the speculative possibilities that it may bring? In the formats and the architectures to which it can be distributed and monetized? What happens when and if we stop being employees at academic institutions? Speaking of Morgane and I. This is what Morgane and I asked in starting a podcast. At least there was a kind of structure through the two of us to continue doing what we were doing anyway, reading tech news and chatting about it. A mutually decided form of recognition for an extremely minimal, unprofitable, semi-anonymous public. A structure to legitimize research in a recognition-based economy. And all of the many men, the many, 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 many men who have stirred the feeling in ourselves to just be a little bit quieter. The meaning of this becomes confusing when we really think about all the noise.
Yapping through sound. It might seem boring or self-evident, some might say. Instagram for activism, Spotify for platform capitalism, Facebook for propaganda, podcasts for platform criticism. Really? I often reflect on the concept, the master tools in the master's house, coined by Audre Lorde. It suggests that the system of power and oppression cannot be dismantled using the same tools and methods that created them. In the context of girl employee, this means that traditional media and modes of communication, which are often embedded in the capitalist structures we critique, may not be sufficient to challenge or change those structures. This raises the question, with our modest following of 90 individuals, how can we hope to make a dent in the Vice Spotify sphere? And thinking about all the noise created, Louise Loller's concept, White Pictures Now, critically examined the significance and relevance of images in contemporary society and the art world. It questioned the omnipresence and power of images in shaping reality, the role of photography in documenting and commodifying art, and the impact of curatorial practices in visual culture on public receptions. Louise Loller's works invited us to reflect on the social, political, and temporal implication of images production and dissemination, urging a deeper engagement with the visual culture that dominates our life and challenges us to consider where certain images hold importance at specific moments in time. So in an ocean of noise and podcast, why using podcast now? Girl Employee hangs on a similar thread, using a medium and an aesthetic that fits a genre, all the while questioning its nature. Lost in an ocean of music and streams, girl talk, and random interviews, it occasionally catches the attention of strangers who might enjoy the anecdotes and facts we're sharing. It is no business model. It is no sustainable way. And still, it is a path for young researchers like us, a way to voice our research in ways that exist beyond the mere academic institution. But is publishing research on those platforms a demonstration of a loss of faith in public and educational institutions? Perhaps, indeed, when people turn away from traditional structures, it may reflect a belief that these places no longer foster the analytical and the independent thinking they once promised. A skepticism that can arise from various factors, such as outdated curricula, bureaucratic constraints, or perceived lack of relevance to real-world issues. Consequently, one might seek alternative avenues for intellectual growth and critical discourse, challenging the role and effectiveness of these institutions in nurturing critical minds. One can choose the podcast because it exists in an infinite time scale. It is only required for the audience's attentions. No venue to attend, no spaces to reserve, no tickets to pay for, and no lecture to attend. The podcast is nomad. The podcast will live on forever. Girl Employee strives to ride two waves simultaneously, one of corporate recognition, achieved through careful curation and aesthetic choices, and the other through garnering the attention of prestigious institutions, like the Modern Museum of Salzburg. Girl Employee seeks it all, believing that a broader platform amplifies the depth and impact of the message. Theory has to be made vocal again. It must be listened to and heard through personal anecdotes, conversation, and various narrative. Sound as a medium allows us to capture the nuances and emotions behind stories and frustrations. It enables us to convey the passion, frustration, and curiosity that drives our explorations. Visual culture and capitalism are complex, multifaceted topics. They encompass everything, from the images we consume daily to the digital systems that govern our economies and lives. No amount of sound, visual, or personal anecdotes can fully capture their complexity. No amount of editing can mimic the perfection of their flows. And perhaps no spaces can hold platforms or institutional criticism without being somehow a part of it. Yapping through sound. It might seem boring or self-evident, some might say.
I think that by definition, the word boss is hegemonic because it just implicates a power structure. I mean, that's literally what it is. So I think that it's, a completely hegemonic power system. And if we take an intersectional approach to the way that we look at class hierarchy and class exploitations, that's directly linked to gender-based discrimination, gender-based hierarchies, and gender-based exploitations. Particularly if we're following some, social reproductive feminist analysis of gender as a class relation. But that's a whole other, inshallah, we can talk about that another time.
So firstly, it is relevant to mention that gamification as a strategy started gaining popularity in the 21st century, but it has a longer history than commonly believed, and it doesn't require advanced technology to be implemented.
Can be so quickly accumulated into the language and into the patterns and into the structures of these power hierarchies, engagement of capitalism. I mean, the term is accumulation, isn't it?
So first, what do I mean here by gamification? So in the Oxford Dictionary, gamification is defined as the application of typical elements of game playing, so point scoring, competition with others, rule of play, to other areas of activity, typically as, for example, online marketing technique, to encourage engagement with a product or a service.
Bumble's Cafe, dubbed Bumble Brew, is slated to open in the fall in the Soho neighborhood of Manhattan. It will operate as a coffee shop and wine bar with small plates, and it was designed to be a comfortable setting for both dates and business networking. The menu has been strategically curated to include foods that aren't messy so guests don't embarrass themselves on dates. Prices for dishes like farro salad with cheese and roasted vegetables or plates of prosciutto will range from $12 to $15.
Of a good story around it. You don't want to feel like you're going to consume something and you know exactly how it's going to taste. Either it's a friendship or a relationship, right? So this is kind of what I'm mostly interested in when we speak about this, is like, whom was on the psychological board of making such a move?
Morgane,
Yes.
are you there?
Yes, I am. Very dramatic lighting, I'm sorry. Couldn't fix it any better.
I think you look great.
Thank you. How does it feel in the space?
It feels okay. I don't know. I
How's
don't
the
know.
architecture like?
I think you never know with these things, really. Could be going
Excuse me?
anyway. No?
I was just trying to hear what you were saying.
There's very, very bright lights.
Mm-hmm.
There's a office table.
Mm-hmm.
There's a screen. There's a lot of people,
Does it
most
look
of whom
like
I do
you're
not
girl
know.
bossing?
Pardon?
Does it look like you're girl bossing? Does it feel like it?
Well, I think when we talk about the etymology of girl boss as a startup that failed, maybe. No?
It does seem to me that in general we do actually quite a good job at presenting as such, but quite often the delivery and the technical difficulties of the podcast prove the contrary.
I mean, if you had to think of like a mood board for girl bossing in terms of like certain typological details or aesthetic details, what do you think they would be?
I think somehow something that is really smooth and pretends to be all put together, which is something I guess we can quite easily fake. For me, it's mostly about the delivering of the product. And I think it's so easy with the technicities and the medium of sound to actually deliver such prefabricated material, because no one sees all the technical and glitches that go into the process of recording this or re-recording this, or quite often encountering also wrong statements, details that go through sound. And so I also like to think that the podcast is a very curated format that actually hides so many flows. And that's also how I imagine the presentation to go today somehow. Girl bossing, not so girl bossing somehow.
I think it's true. I mean, I also think about all of the different technical difficulties we have in recording this podcast. I mean, you being in Taiwan and me on the other side, and the timings and the recordings and the structure of it, no? I wouldn't say that the performance today feels particularly smooth. I think it feels on the edge of the effort to be smooth, but there's a lot of clear points of contingency. I mean, you're not really here to know, but I'm sure that you could imagine, no?
I can totally imagine, and I can also sense how being so far away in distance has actually also made this collaboration richer and richer.
You think so?
But it's just been a rough summer in many regards, I guess, and also for you, right?
Yeah. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm in the countryside of Tokyo where nothing much happens, trying to finish some projects and mostly heal from some stuff that has been happening in the past, and it's cathartical, I would say. Yeah. How are you doing?
I think I'm doing fine. I'm staying in a hotel room with 3 beds. And I wonder who they envisioned sleeping there. No?
Wait, can you repeat that, please?
That I'm staying in a hotel room with 3 beds. There's a single bed and a double bed.
Which bed are you sleeping in?
In the double bed.
Of course. How's your love life going?
Compulsive and avoidant.
Compulsive and avoidance.
And yours?
Sounds like, oh, oh, mine. Mine is going, let's say, intense but distant,
That's good.
if there's such things.
I think there might be.
On that note, as we always usually do, end each podcast with a topical song. I would be curious to know if you have one for today.
I think we should play a song for the end.
Warcraft, that's on point.
Legacy is undefeated. You gon' jump if AG made it. If you